What if silence wasn't peaceful, but punishment? These 10 gay men were once rising stars, handsome, talented, unforgettable. But the moment they lived their truth, the spotlight dimmed. No scandals, no headlines, just a quiet fade out. Was it Hollywood's fear of queer power, or the price of not playing pretend? This isn't just a list, it's a wake-up call. Because when being yourself costs you everything, we have to ask, what exactly is Hollywood so afraid of? Max Emerson. At one point, Max Emerson felt unstoppable. With six-pack abs, razor-sharp wit, and a digital charisma that made even the shyest viewer feel seen, he was everything an online star was meant to be. But unlike others chasing fame with filters and thirst traps, Max used his platform for something deeper. He wasn't just shirtless, he was honest. He joked, he ranted, he shared. Whether it was queer politics, mental health, or the brutal truth about Hollywood's fake allyship, Max showed up unfiltered, and people loved him for it. In a world full of noise, Max Emerson felt like a signal, loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. And then, silence. In 2017, Max co-wrote, produced, and starred in Hooked, an indie film about gay teen homelessness. It wasn't a vanity project. He toured shelters, raised awareness, and used his own story to spotlight others. But while fans applauded, the industry pulled away. He never hid his queerness to play the game, and that may have been his quiet undoing. Hollywood loves LGBTQ+ visibility in theory, but only when it's neat, sanitized, and safe for sponsors. Max was none of those things. He talked openly about sex, body image, trauma. He was political, proud, and deeply human. And for that, the door slowly closed. No scandals, no blacklist, just less. Less roles, less coverage, less interest. Today, Max is still here. Still funny, still fearless. Still building a space that centers real queer voices. But the world that once flirted with his fame has ghosted him entirely. Maybe because Max didn't just want attention, he wanted change. And change in Hollywood is dangerous. So if you've ever laughed at one of his videos, cried during Hooked, or found yourself in his words, drop a comment. Because Max Emerson didn't fade away. He was pushed out. Quietly, like so many others. And that should never be okay. So the next time you scroll past an old clip of Max Emerson, or wonder why someone so bold, so magnetic seemed to disappear, remember this: he didn't fade out. He was edited out, and he wasn't the only one. Stick around, because what happened to Max was just the beginning. Colton Haynes. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a meltdown, it was just a moment. One quiet, vulnerable moment when Colton Haynes finally stopped pretending. For years, he played the perfect leading man. The smirk, the sculpted jawline, the abs carved by casting expectations. From Teen Wolf to Arrow, he wasn't just acting. He was performing a version of himself the world demanded. Masculine, mysterious, and above all, straight. Behind every red carpet appearance, every cover shoot, every press junket joke, there was a boy slowly suffocating. Colton once said that hiding his truth gave him crippling anxiety and panic attacks. But he kept going, because he was told that coming out would cost him everything. And he believed it. When he did come out in 2016, it wasn't a grand media moment. It was quiet, exhausted, the kind of confession that doesn't crave attention, just peace. He opened up about years of internal battles, about being pressured into silence, about trying to disappear. And for a moment, the world listened. Fans cheered, headlines buzzed. The LGBTQ+ community embraced him. But just beneath the surface, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly, chillingly. The calls stopped. The auditions dried up. The scripts, when they came, felt smaller, safer, sidelined. He was no longer cast as the fantasy. He was cast as the footnote. And suddenly, all those roles he would have aced, the tormented hero, the irresistible heartbreaker, went elsewhere. Because now the illusion was broken. Colton was no longer for the girls. He was no longer neutral. He was real. And for an industry built on fantasies, that reality was inconvenient. He wasn't flamboyant. He didn't campaign. He didn't turn his truth into a brand. He just lived it. And that somehow was worse. Because Hollywood knows how to package a spectacle, but what it doesn't know how to handle is quiet honesty. Colton Haynes didn't fade because he lost relevance. He faded because he reclaimed himself. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that he came out, but that the industry couldn't handle what came next. Luke Evans. There are some faces you expect to see on a movie poster. Luke Evans had one of them. Chiseled, timeless, heroic. He was born to lead blockbusters: Dracula, Untold, The Hobbit, Beauty and the Beast. On screen, he was bold, magnetic, impossible to look away from. Off screen, he was polite, private, and quietly open about being gay. And somehow that was the problem. Luke didn't hide. He also didn't shout. He never made a spectacle of his sexuality, but he never denied it. He simply lived. Authentically. Gracefully. As if Hollywood had finally evolved enough to let a man be both gay and a romantic lead. But it hadn't. Producers didn't slam doors in his face, they just stopped inviting him in. Slowly, the calls for big-budget films tapered off. Prestige dramas overlooked him. Even queer stories began casting safer options, usually straight men playing gay for applause. Because Luke was real. And real queerness, no matter how composed, still made executives nervous. He didn't play the victim. He didn't call it out. He kept working. Indie projects, side characters, stage roles. Once a leading man, now an outsider with quiet pride and even quieter heartbreak. He dated, yes, but discreetly. Paparazzi rarely caught him, and when they did, it was just a walk, a hand held, a glance exchanged. No scandal, no spectacle. Just a man refusing to sell his truth as a headline. There were whispers about long-term partners, maybe even plans for a family, but nothing was ever confirmed. Not because he was hiding, but because the world never bothered to ask. No People magazine spread, no red carpet frenzy, just the quiet grace of someone who lived honestly in an industry built on illusion. And still, the spotlight moved on. Because Luke Evans proved you can have the looks, the talent, the fans, but if you refuse to make your queerness palatable, Hollywood will shelve you like an expired trend. He didn't fade because he failed. He faded because he didn't fit the fantasy anymore. And in an industry that markets love on screen but punishes it off screen, Luke's silence wasn't his choice. It was theirs. George Shelley. He didn't want a headline. He just wanted to breathe. George Shelley wasn't like the other boys in the band. While Union J leaned into the classic pop star image, posing, flirting, playing the game, George carried a softness that felt real. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to sell. All he had to do was smile, and you felt it. But underneath that boy next door charm was a truth waiting to be spoken, and the moment it was, everything changed. In 2016, George posted a quiet, heartfelt YouTube video. No glitter, no fireworks, just honesty. He shared that he had loved both girls and guys. No labels, no drama, just a human truth. The LGBTQ+ community embraced him with open arms. Fans poured in with love. But the industry, it froze. He wasn't kicked out. He wasn't ridiculed. He was just set aside. Silently. Union J had already been struggling post-X Factor, but after George's video, the second chance they'd hoped for vanished. His solo music stalled. Labels cooled off. Suddenly, the charming heartthrob became the gay one, and pop didn't know how to sell that. He wasn't loud enough to be radical. He wasn't ambiguous enough to keep up the illusion. And that illusion, the idea that every girl could still dream of him, was half the business model. When he clarified 2 years later, "I'm gay," it was honest, whole, and brave. But instead of lifting him up, the silence only deepened. Opportunities dried up. Hosting gigs fizzled. He moved into content creation, radio, acting, but nothing hit the same note as his time in Union J. Because here's the truth. George Shelley had the voice, the face, the heart. What he didn't have was the industry's willingness to accept him without pretense. He wasn't erased by scandal. He was erased by discomfort. Too soft to be a rebel. Too queer to stay marketable, too sincere for PR to spin. And maybe that's the quiet tragedy. Not that he came out, but that when he did, pop music left the room. Wentworth Miller. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't come from forgetting, but from choosing to be forgotten. Wentworth Miller knew that silence well. At the peak of his fame, he was everywhere. Prison Break turned him into a global icon, a brooding genius, ice-cold exterior, fire beneath. He didn't need loud lines or big gestures. He commanded every frame with a glance. His character, Michael Scofield, was calculated, unreadable, magnetic, and so was Wentworth himself. For years, he played the role, not just on screen but in life, a role the industry demanded: straight, strong, silent. And he nearly broke trying to keep it. Behind the piercing stare was a man unraveling under pressure. Wentworth lived in fear, of tabloids, of questions, of being found out. In 2013, he shattered the illusion not through a PR interview, but a powerful letter declining to attend a Russian film festival, calling out its anti-LGBTQ+ laws. It was the first time he used the word gay. Not for applause, not for branding, but because the truth wouldn't wait anymore. And just like that, something shifted. He wasn't blacklisted, he wasn't dragged, he was simply ghosted. The roles dried up, the momentum stopped, not as punishment, but as abandonment. In later years, he returned for another season of Prison Break, but it wasn't the same. He soon announced he would no longer play straight characters, not out of limitation, but liberation. "I'm done playing roles that require me to lie about who I am," he said. And in that one sentence, he revealed everything Hollywood fears. An actor no longer willing to be a product, no longer willing to be everyone else's fantasy at the cost of his own sanity. He became a writer, a speaker, an advocate for mental health, LGBTQ+ youth, and those struggling in silence. And yet, while others with less talent and less truth soared into new franchises and leading roles, Wentworth was politely ignored. Because when a gay man looks like him, powerful, masculine, desirable, Hollywood doesn't know what to do. They either try to rebrand him or erase him. Wentworth refused both. He didn't fade, he escaped. From the closet, from the script, from the system that tried to cast him forever in a role that wasn't his. He may have walked away from the spotlight, but ask yourself this: why was he only welcome as long as he kept pretending? And how many others are still trapped in a role that's slowly killing them? Lee Pace. Lee Pace was never meant to be background. He had the kind of face that seemed carved out of myth, tall, striking, haunting. In The Fall, Pushing Daisies, The Hobbit, he moved like he belonged to a world bigger, more beautiful than ours. A leading man with the heart of a poet and the gaze of a storm. But in Hollywood, beauty is only bankable when it follows the script. And Lee Pace refused to read between the lines. For years, speculation swirled. Was he gay? Why didn't he say? Why didn't he deny it? And Lee, elegant, private, unfazed, gave them nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't label. He simply existed, working, creating, living his life off camera the way he chose. Then came 2018. In a quiet interview, he acknowledged that he'd dated both men and women. No coming out special, no branding opportunity, just an honest, almost reluctant truth. And that truth, soft, unmarketed, unbothered, was somehow louder than any rainbow parade. Hollywood didn't explode, it just withdrew. It was as if the moment he stopped sidestepping the question, the fantasy broke. Not for fans, they still adored him, but for the people who held the casting calls, the decision makers. Suddenly, the towering prestige roles went elsewhere. The romantic leads faded. He was shuffled into quiet indies, supporting parts, a name you only whispered during award season but never celebrated out loud. Because Lee Pace didn't fit the system's binary. He wasn't out enough to be their token. He wasn't in enough to play pretend. He lived in the in-between, and that terrified them. Even his 2022 marriage to longtime partner Matthew Foley went almost unnoticed. No magazine spreads, no industry buzz. While others cashed in on wedding photo ops, Lee's love story was treated like trivia. And maybe that's the quiet tragedy. He did everything right. He was graceful, talented, loved, but he didn't play the game. And Hollywood, for all its talk about authenticity, only rewards queerness when it comes in a convenient, clickable package. Lee Pace didn't stop shining, they just stopped looking. So what do you call it when someone's truth is too quiet to be marketable, but too honest to ignore? You call it what it is, not a scandal, a slow, intentional erasure. And if it could happen to Lee Pace, it could happen to anyone. Kevin McHale. It's strange how a voice can linger longer than a face. Long after the final episode faded to black, after the cast moved on and the headlines dried up, one voice stayed. It wasn't the loudest, it wasn't the most flamboyant, but it was the one that cracked through silence and filled it with something soft, something steady, something human. That was Kevin McHale. As Artie Abrams in Glee, Kevin didn't dance across the stage like the others. He didn't get the flashiest romances or the most dramatic solos. He sat in a wheelchair, overlooked, underestimated, and when he opened his mouth to sing, everything else melted away. He wasn't just playing an underdog, he embodied one. Behind the scenes, Kevin was a real musician, a trained vocalist, a former member of the boy band NLT. He had the kind of talent that doesn't beg for attention, it earns it quietly. So when Glee ended in 2015, everyone assumed his career would naturally take off. The stage was set, he had millions of fans, charisma, discipline, and heart. But the industry didn't call. Not loudly, not at all. He wasn't cast in musicals, he wasn't offered rom-coms or sitcoms, he was just absent. Not because he disappeared, but because Hollywood never really saw him in the first place. In 2018, Kevin came out, not with drama or branding or a Netflix special, but with love, a tweet, a photo. A quiet acknowledgement that he was in a relationship with actor Austin McKenzie. It was wholesome, joyful, and unremarkable in the best way. But in a world where queerness is only valued when it's tortured, when it comes with trauma or spectacle, Kevin's peace was seen as a missed opportunity, not a celebration. He didn't cry on cue, he didn't fight to reclaim the mic, he just kept being himself. And for that, he was forgotten. He released music, stayed active online, connected with fans. But the offers that should have been his, the funny best friend, the quirky lead, the next musical breakout, never came. Because he didn't brand his truth, he didn't monetize his identity, he didn't market himself as the gay one. And Hollywood didn't know how to sell a story without a headline. Kevin didn't fade because he lacked talent. He faded because he refused to turn his life into a narrative for profit. So the next time you hear Artie sing and you feel something you can't explain, don't just call it nostalgia. Call it what it is. The sound of someone who gave everything and got nothing back. Not because he failed, but because he was too quiet to be marketable and too real to be rewritten. Matt Dallas. He looked like every casting director's dream. Matt Dallas had the face of a leading man sculpted from light, smooth jawline, soulful eyes, the kind of quiet magnetism that didn't need words to sell desire. When he walked onto the screen in Kyle XY, he wasn't just playing a mysterious boy with no memory. He became the mystery. Teen magazines couldn't get enough. Fans swooned, producers leaned in, and behind the scenes, one truth was hammered in over and over. Don't ruin this. Don't be this. Because the kind of fame Matt was offered came with a condition. You can be everyone's fantasy, as long as you never admit who you actually are. He obeyed, for years. While gossip blogs speculated and forums whispered, Matt denied, deflected, smiled through it. He was seen dating women, doing press tours, playing coy in interviews where the truth sat in his throat like a stone. He wasn't lying to win roles. He was lying to survive. And for a while, it worked. But inside, something was breaking. Because fame means nothing when you can't be seen, and love feels like exile when you have to hide it in public. By the time Matt finally came out in 2013, the world had moved on. He wasn't the hot new thing anymore. Kyle XY was off the air. The heat had cooled. He did it anyway, bravely, quietly, announcing that he was gay, in love, engaged to musician Blue Hamilton. There was no PR strategy, no Netflix special. Just truth. And Hollywood responded with silence. No applause, no embrace, no roles. Only the thudding realization that when you stop selling the fantasy, you stop being invited to play. Because Matt didn't come out on their terms. When he was young, bankable, profitable. He came out on his terms when he had nothing left to lose. And in this industry, queerness that arrives too late isn't revolutionary. It's inconvenient. They didn't cancel him. They just closed the door and left him outside, in the cold, holding nothing but the truth he waited too long to say. And that's the part no one talks about, how waiting for the right time sometimes means there's no time left at all. Matt Dallas didn't burn out. He was buried quietly beneath the character he once played, and never allowed to step back into the light, not because he failed, but because he was finally, beautifully, unmarketably real. Andy Mientus. He wasn't built for the spotlight, but he earned it anyway. Andy Mientus never shouted for attention. He didn't fit the typical mold of a leading man, nor did he try. What he had was something harder to define, a presence. On stage, on screen, in interviews, there was a gravity to him, a sincerity that pulled people in. He didn't audition for fame. He simply told the truth and hoped someone was listening. They were. At first, his breakout as Kyle Bishop in NBC's Smash was quiet but powerful, a queer composer who led with empathy, not ego. For many LGBTQ+ viewers, it was the first time they saw someone like themselves portrayed not as a stereotype, but as a soul. And the fact that Andy himself was openly gay made it all the more meaningful. He was living the kind of representation the industry claimed to be hungry for. But the hunger didn't last. After Smash, the roles never rose to meet the moment. He kept working, theater, guest spots, even playing the openly gay superhero Pied Piper in The Flash. But while other actors used one breakout role to springboard into franchises, prestige series, and global deals, Andy remained on the margins. And it wasn't because he wasn't talented. It was because he was already complete. Andy didn't tease his queerness for attention. He didn't make it vague for palatability. He was out. From the beginning, he married actor Michael Arden. He spoke openly about disability, queer identity, activism, and mental health. He refused to shrink. And that refusal, it made him uncastable. Because Hollywood loves queerness when it's coded, when it's wrapped in sparkle, or when it's performed by someone who can still sell a fantasy to straight audiences. Andy offered none of that. What he offered was authenticity. And to a business built on illusion, that's the most dangerous thing of all. He was too thoughtful to be tokenized, too political to be neutral, too human to be simplified. And so the silence crept in, not as punishment, but as avoidance. Not a scandal, not a cancellation, just a quiet refusal to acknowledge someone who wouldn't make himself smaller to fit. Andy Mientus didn't stop acting. The industry stopped looking. But he's still here, writing, performing, pushing boundaries. Not because they gave him a platform, but because he built his own. And if that makes him too real for the spotlight, then maybe it's the spotlight that's broken. Jonathan Bennett. Not everyone disappears with a bang. Some fade out with a smile still on their face. Jonathan Bennett didn't explode into controversy. He didn't get caught in scandal. He didn't rebel. He just kept smiling. Through the interviews, through the polite indifference, through the long, slow silence that followed the moment he decided to stop pretending. For a moment, he was everywhere. As Aaron Samuels in Mean Girls, he became the crush of a generation. The boy with the perfect hair who asked what day it was and somehow made Wednesdays sexy. He had that rare kind of charm, safe, warm, familiar. A face moms loved and teenagers adored. He wasn't the bad boy. He was the boy you trusted. Hollywood should have embraced him, branded him, built a decade around his dimples. But instead, it kept him in a box, one with invisible walls and even stricter conditions. He could be the heartthrob. He could be the fantasy, as long as he never made the mistake of being real. So for years, Jonathan did what so many young actors had to do. He played the part on screen, and another one off it. The one where he dodged questions, where he dated actresses, where he smiled through press junkets while hiding half his heart. He waited for the right time to come out. He thought maybe the world would meet him halfway. It didn't. When Jonathan finally came out, it wasn't strategic. It wasn't about owning the narrative. It was just love. He introduced his boyfriend, now husband, James Vaughn, not as a statement, but as a celebration. Because why should that kind of happiness stay hidden? But instead of celebration, he got silence. He wasn't offered rom-com leads. He wasn't written into network dramas. He wasn't even on the radar anymore. Because he had committed the quietest of Hollywood sins. He had broken the illusion. The boy that once made girls giggle and boys question themselves had become, in the eyes of casting directors, too gay to be everyone's crush and too soft to be a queer icon. Too in between. Too whole. So they let him go. Jonathan didn't stop working. He leaned into what was left. Hallmark movies, hosting gigs, small indie projects. He gave interviews, showed up for Pride, officiated weddings, and stayed kind. But that smile we all fell in love with, it started to look more like armor. Because deep down, even he must have known. He didn't lose his spotlight because he failed. He lost it because he stepped out of the fantasy and into himself. Jonathan Bennett was never loud, never reckless, never wrong. He just told the truth before Hollywood was ready to hear it, and they answered him with silence. But we remember, and maybe in the end, that's the love story that matters most. These men didn't fade because they failed. They faded because they dared to live honestly in an industry that rewards illusion and punishes truth. Hollywood didn't cancel them. It just stopped calling. But we can remember, we can say their names, and remind the world that quiet erasure is still erasure. Which story stayed with you? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe visibility still matters, like, share, and subscribe to help keep these voices alive.